Want to live longer and better? I'm Dr. Jess, I'm a physical therapist, and in this podcast, I bring you real, science-backed strategies from physical health providers, mental health providers, and nutrition experts, so you can build strength, protect your mind, and fuel your body for decades to come. Longevity starts here. Running gets a bad rap. It's bad for your knees, it accelerates aging, and it's only for the young. But what if the research actually shows us the opposite? What if running, when done well, is actually one of the strongest predictors of healthy aging? Well, that's what exactly I'm going to be breaking down in this episode. The myths, the biomechanics, and longevity benefits of running. That way you can build a body that's designed to last, not just for the next race, but for decades to come. So why is it that running gets such a bad rap sometimes? I hear it all the time in the clinic. I probably have this or that pain when I'm in my 80s because I ran when I was in my 20s. It's just like it's a really, really common blame game. And the reality is that running doesn't make you live less number of years. It doesn't bring on chronic illness. It doesn't bring on metabolic disease. It doesn't bring on all of these things that are breaking our population down. So why? Why do people think it's not good for you? When in reality, runners on average live 3 years longer than non-runners. They have 30 to 45% decreased risk of cardiovascular illness, and it's one of the strongest predictors of being able to prevent neurodegenerative illnesses, think dementia, Parkinson's, things like that, of lifestyle change that you can do. Not genetic, just lifestyle change. So if we know these things about running, the research shows that, it's okay, well, let's dive a little bit deeper into why does running get this kind of bad name. So then I started thinking about it more, and it's well, of course it gets a bad rap, because what other sport or activity do we pick up and just go out and do with zero training? None, right? You just put some shoes on and you go for a run. Well, that's everybody just kind of expects that that's all it is. But would you go out to a golf course and just play 18 rounds or 18 holes, one round, and not have any training? Don't learn about your swing, don't figure out the what are the logistics of how do I do this properly so that I can do it well? Same thing with any other sport. We're typically going to get some kind of coaching, or go to the gym and work with a personal trainer. If you go to a class, there's an instructor teaching you. But with running, you put your shoes on and go. I'm the perfect example of this person. Okay, I did this. So when I was in undergrad, I was a freshman. I wasn't playing collegiate level sports, but in high school I did. And so running was something that we did when we were in trouble. You run, that's kind of the only time we actually ran distance, or just conditioning preseason. But that was you just kind of get it over with. But nobody said oh, hey, when you're running the track, here's some specific things I want you to work on to make sure that you don't get shin splints and you don't get, issues going on with your hip, bursitis, things like that. And I did get shin splints and I did get these other things. And, the trainer treated them very reactively. It calmed down. And, once we switched into the sport and off of just endurance training, then it would get better. And I just never really thought about it. Fast forward to college, and one of my good friends was a cross-country runner, and she really wanted a running partner. And she kept asking me, please join for my run. I don't want to run by myself. And I was like, no, I'm not in trouble. I don't run. That's obviously punishment. And she was like, no, it's not. Please just join me. And so, for a full semester, that fall semester, she kept asking. I kept saying no. And by spring semester, I was finally fine, I'll go run with you. And so I do what most people do, and I just take off, right? I know nothing about pacing. I know nothing about form. I know nothing about breathing. Zero strategy. I just take off. And she was like, what are you doing? And I was like, running. And she was like, no, no wonder you don't want to run with me. That's miserable. You're trying to sprint a mile. You're going to be dead in a quarter mile, out of breath. You're going to be having stitches in your side. Your technique is terrible. And she just was like, let me teach you. And so I was like, oh, I had no idea. You can be taught how to run And then you start learning about the mechanics of running. It's like, oh wow, there's a lot here. There's a lot to break down. And as she taught me, because luckily she was taught by a cross-country coach, then I actually started enjoying running, and I have been running for more than 2 decades now. And I really do enjoy it. So I really think that's the reason why it gets such a bad rap, is because people have poor technique. And with that, you get injuries. And injuries equal pain. And pain means this can't be good for you if it hurts. And it's so common. I mean, one of my subspecialties is treating runners, because I understand the gait mechanics. I'm a runner myself. I've had so many of the injuries. As I've learned how to cross-train appropriately over the years, obviously, once I went to PT school, I was able to learn a lot more about biomechanics and truly start to delve into the nuance of cross-training, the importance of mobility, flexibility, all of these things that I just wasn't doing before. And now, in my 40s, I'm running with way less pain, injuries, anything like that, and really enjoying it than when I was in my 20s and early 30s, and it was all sorts of little things here and there that, I was able to work through, nothing catastrophic, luckily. But it was just, tendinitises, aches and pains, bursitis, all the different things that can happen. I've kind of experienced most of them over the years. And it's one of those things that I love talking about running because I've gone through the painful curve of learning. And instead of just working with patients one-on-one and sharing this knowledge, I just really like getting a platform out there where I can say hey, it's not just you. I've made all the same mistakes, I promise. And let me just share them. And then that way, maybe you can learn from them and not repeat the same mistakes I made. You can make your own mistakes. Just don't repeat mine. So anyway, now let's talk a little bit about why is the gait pattern so important for running. And the gait pattern just means how you're moving your legs in space. So how are you striking the ground, and then how you're pushing yourself forward. So that's a gait pattern. So when we walk, so it's a very different pattern than when we run. And this is key. This is really important for how you can actually really clean up the form itself for running. Now, there's lots of videos on YouTube. You can search running coaches, and there's lots of information on this out there. So I definitely encourage you to, if you really want to dive into the nitty gritty of running, lots of exercises you can do and whatnot. But so this is today is a bit of an overview of the gait pattern, so that you can have that little bit of a better appreciation for the why behind how running is important. Now, but first, we all know how to walk. Well, not all of us. If you're under 1, you don't. But if you're above 1 to, somewhere between 12 months to 15 months, you're probably ambulating, into what we call a heel to toe gait pattern. And so what that looks like is the hip comes up, and then that heel comes out and strikes the ground underneath you. You propel your weight over that leg, and then, we go into what the next phase is, what kind of propels you forward. So the hip goes back, and then we just repeat, over and over again. So as the heel strike, all the way into what we call the toe off, which is where the toe starts to, fully leave the ground. And that's where the calf kind of ends with the push off. So why this is important is because we have to have a little bit of a discussion of physics. Nothing crazy, okay? But we know for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So when the foot strikes the ground, okay, there's going to be a force that is pushed into the ground, okay? So that's called, it's going to be a ground reaction force. So what that means is there's going to be an equal and opposite force that kicks back up. So I'm going to use my microphone to hold that steady. So the equal and opposite reactive force that comes up is in the direction of my pin, which is opposite of the direction of where I'm wanting to go, which is forward. Okay, so this is key. Now, when I'm walking, this is not a strong force. Okay, I'm not striking the ground really hard or anything like that. And I need to walk like this because I need to clear my toes from the surface so I don't trip and fall. So we don't want a flat foot contact. That would be a shuffling pattern. That's when people trip and fall forward. So we got to lift the foot up off the ground, clear the surface, any rugs, stones, concrete, who knows what. And then now I can have a nice clean contact, and then I use my muscles to pull myself forward. However, when I'm running, there's going to be increased ground reaction force because I'm going to be striking the ground a little bit harder than when I'm walking. So now if I do this with a run and I heel strike, now I'm trying to propel myself forward, but I've got this opposite force coming back this way. So that's what can create shin splints, and some of the other issues that we can see. And it's not efficient. You're working way too hard. So if I were to change my foot strike, so I lift my foot up, my knee up rather, and then I put my foot down underneath me when I strike, now I've got my ground reaction force coming straight back up. So at least it's not hurting me, right? It's not pushing me backwards. I'm not having a fight against that. However, if I add a little bit of a forward trunk lean, so I lift my leg, I strike the ground right underneath me, but I'm in a little bit of a forward trunk lean, now the ground reaction force is actually helping to propel me forward. So then from there, I push with my glute, to propel me, and I'm essentially constantly moving forward in a very slight, not way forward, but a very slight, about 10 degrees forward trunk lean. So just by changing the trunk lean and the foot strike, we can significantly decrease the repetitive stress that's on the body. And that's just breaking down, the body is levers and pulleys, that's all it is. And so muscles, tendons, ligaments that are controlling the positions of our bones in space. And so if we can think, okay, well, that's something that's relatively easy correction to make. It takes some training, it takes practice. You might have somebody video you to see if that's happening, if you're able to change that foot strike. Nothing's going to happen just when you practice once. Like, you're going to have to practice multiple times and really make a concerted effort through motor control. So how our brain is thinking about where our body is in space is going to be really important. But that one change is huge for decreasing pain. Now, a couple of other things that we just want to think about. I'm going to bring my skeleton model back out. When we're running, we also want to think about what muscles are we using. So we could be using a bunch of small muscles and just repetitively, like hip flexors, for example, they're kind of in the front of the hip. We can be trying to drive a lot through that, or we could be trying to drive a lot just in our hamstring. So that would be what we call a premature heel off. And so if I strike the ground and then I lift my heel off the ground before my hip extends, then I'm just taking out my glutes completely. So a lot of running is also what muscles am I using and what muscles are being lazy. And that's going to be, pretty important. So we want to make sure we're using those big muscles and the small muscles, so that way everything's kind of timing and sequencing together. And so a good way to be able to help with all of this is in cross-training. And so this is something that, again, a lot of runners don't do, is they don't cross-train. And what that means is just doing something other than running. And this is any athlete, it doesn't matter who you are. Like, whatever your main focused thing that you like to do. So if you like lifting heavy, then you've got to cross train in cardio and mobility. If you like running, you've got to cross train in strength and mobility. If you like mobility, you've got to cross train in strength. So it's like everybody's got something that they really kind of gravitate towards, whereas we've always got to kind of fill in those gaps because you're leaving yourself exposed. So runners are really good with cardiovascular training. They get really good endurance and strong there, but oftentimes they're going to have asymmetries that start building. So that's mobility, so you get tight in certain areas, and then weaknesses, big time. I see this time and again. The smaller muscles that really are going to be stabilizing how we're positioned in space start getting weak because we're just overtraining the other muscles. And so a common one is the outside of the hip. Okay, there's a muscle here called your glute med. And so I'm looking in this frontal plane right now. And so when we strike the ground, so the leg comes up and we strike the ground, the glute med keeps the pelvis nice and straight like this. But when it's weak, that pelvis dips like this. So that's what we call in Trendelenburg gait pattern. And so that puts a lot of stress out here on the outside of the hip, and it puts a lot of stress on the inside of the knee. So we'll see a lot of bursitis on the outside of the hip, and we'll see a lot of medial knee pain or pain on the inside of the knee. And then sometimes we'll see tendonitis down here in the ankle as well with a Trendelenburg pattern. And most people aren't going to have a strong glute med just because you really do have to train that to keep it strong. Just like most people aren't going to have super mobile hamstrings unless they actively stretch their hamstrings. There's just patterns that develop in our body. And so whenever we cross train as a runner, that needs to be specific to running, not just generalized cross training. I mean, that's fine. You're just not going to get the results that you're going to get if you add specificity. And so what does that look like? Well, think about the activity. So running, we're going to be striking the ground with one leg while the other leg is in the air, and then we're going to switch it. So it's a lot of single leg standing and staying stable on that single leg to give you that foundation to pull that next leg up off the ground, and then that's going to strike the ground, and then we're going to reverse it. So single leg training. So it could be, doing step-ups on a single leg, lateral lunges, single leg Roman deadlifts, like bridging on a single leg. So lots of training one leg and the other, like, working in lunge type patterns where we're putting weight a little bit asymmetrically and then switching it. So all of that kind of training where you're having to think about, where is my leg in space and am I controlling it? And then I weight that down and then I do repetitions. That's going to be a lot more specific than just doing a bunch of squats, a bunch of double leg bridges. I'm trying to think of other common ones, like lying on your belly in the gym and just doing hamstring curls on both legs, things like that. Because in running, we're never really standing on two legs. And you can apply this concept to any sport. Like I said, like a tennis player is going to cross train differently than a gymnast is going to cross train differently than a CrossFit lifter or a golfer. You just think about the activity and then we kind of break it down from there. Now, the other piece of that, so that's going to be strengthening and how we think about maintaining and building strength that's specific to the activity. And we got to think about mobility and flexibility. So these are different categories. So we always have cardio, strength, and mobility, flexibility. There are 3 different baskets. So if you don't train each of those, you're going to see breakdowns. And again, I was that runner that did not stretch for longer than I really would like to admit. Why? Because I was busy. Yeah. Well, I'm busy now, but I stretch. See what I mean? So we're all busy. So it's a matter of it's important. So like I was telling you before, if we don't extend your hip while you're in that gait pattern and you don't use your glutes, you're gonna overuse something else. And so now, why are we not using those glutes? Is it weakness? Well, I just explained we can strengthen that. So that's the cross-training strengthening plan. And I've got some other videos I've done that we'll kind of put in the comments with some exercises and stuff like that for runners. So just kind of look in the description and there'll be a link in there. Also, when I use my glute, my hip has to extend. So this is a really common one. I test on runners all the time. I'll turn them onto their side and I'll check for their hip extension. And so I bring that leg back and it does not extend. The pelvis just tilts. Everything is so tight in there. And so when we stretch as a runner, you've got to be making sure that you're not just stretching your quad standing with the hip in neutral. We've got to get that hip to extend as you stretch the quad. So this is why I really prefer, if you can tolerate it, it's a half kneel quad stretch. So when I'm in this half kneel position, I can extend the hip and then I either reach back for the ankle to stretch the quad or you use a strap. If you can't tolerate that, you can do one off the edge of a surface. Sometimes we'll modify it in sideline, so you're laying on one side, and then we'll get that femur back. But again, there's just going to be certain things that we need. Same thing with ankle dorsiflexion. So that's pulling your toes back to your nose. Most all of my evals that I do for runners, I'll measure ankle dorsiflexion and they get to neutral. They're not actually going past neutral. So there's 0 degrees of dorsiflexion because they're not stretching the calves. Well, if I'm trying to propel myself over this stance leg so that I can actually use all of the appropriate muscles, but if that calf is really tight, then I'm going to do what we call the premature heel off. So I'm going to lift my heel because I don't have the ankle range to do it. And so again, sometimes the issue is that you're just not stretching appropriately or consistently. That's the key, is it's consistency. So there's essentially how you warm up and prepare your body for a run, how you stretch after a run, and how you cross-train all leads to being able to run without injury, without pain. But again, how many people do that? I mean, it took me becoming a PT and then treating all of these people in pain to go okay, well, obviously this is a common thing and let's look at the common denominator. So going from there, Then I start making videos because I just love sharing knowledge. And I think there's so many things that we can do to improve our health that don't cost money. It's like, it's free. It's information. I've got it. I'm going to share it. So now that kind of breaks down, that kind of breaks down more into like the why does it get a bad rap. I'm going to do another episode, just so you know, on a little bit more of the specificity of different injuries that can happen. And that'll be another episode though, just to kind of break them down a little bit further to see if that can be helpful to people. So now moving forward, to kind of put the nail in the coffin of like, for real, running isn't bad for you. Let's talk a little bit more about why do runners typically live 3 years longer than non-runners. Okay. And this is the science of it, which is really pretty cool. And this is why I really haven't stopped running. And I won't unless I truly get some sort of injury that it's not safe for me to run. Otherwise, I mean, I've got this lady in my neighborhood. She's like late 70s, maybe early 80s. And she's out there 3 days a week. Is she fast? No. Does it matter? No, the science doesn't say she has to be fast. It doesn't say she has to win races. It just says you've got to be consistent with your cardiovascular training. That's the key. Just keep on going, right? The tortoise and the hare, be the tortoise, just don't stop. And then, you get better and better with it. You start learning your body. You start learning what distances do I like? What distances do I feel better with? Is it about being the fastest person out there? Some people really enjoy that. They enjoy racing. I honestly right now, I don't race a race, mainly because I don't have the time to put into my training to safely do it. And that's the key. It's, running a clinic, doing a podcast, having a couple of kids, being a friend, a wife, a mom, there's so many different roles that I have to be kind of specific on where do I want to allocate my time and how much time per day can I allocate to certain things. And at this point in my life, it just isn't that important to me. Now, if it was like before I had kids, I did like to be a little bit more competitive with it, which was fine. I was in a different phase. Once my kids are older and they think I'm not that cool, I'm not there yet. So I'm going to try and live it as long as I can. Then yeah, I might be like, okay, I'll put in an extra 30 minutes a day into how I cross train, things like that. All right, now I don't have the 30 minutes. I'm barely making it to relax time, which is when we all finally sit down together and just sit, but I'm like up to the finish line to get there to, get everything in a day done. I promise I'm just as busy as the next person. And, I can eke it out. I can just eke out the time that I need to make me a healthy individual so I can be strong for those around me. Okay, so cardiovascular benefits of running. Well, why do we have a decreased risk of cardiovascular illness? So think, heart attacks, things like that. Heart disease, having to get a stent in your heart, nothing that we want. It's because when we run, we improve our VO2 max. And so it's just and this is one of the strongest predictors of lifespan. So as humans, we need oxygen to function. And so if we can improve the efficiency of us breathing oxygen in, so that's going to kind of come into our lungs, the blood circulating through our lungs is going to pick up that oxygen. It's going to deliver it to all of the tissues in our body that need it. So this is working muscles, this is our brain, this is our organs. Everything kind of needs this blood flow. And then the byproduct of a muscle contraction is carbon dioxide. So that's what travels in the vein. And we exhale that out. And then we breathe in again. We breathe in more oxygen. So that is the circulatory system. The stronger and faster and more efficient we make that circulatory system, every organ in our body, our muscles and our brain are getting coated and more efficiently being delivered oxygen, which is amazing, right? So that's pretty cool. So going out for 30 minutes, 3 to 5 days a week, if that's what works for your schedule and your endurance and whatnot, it's dramatic for the VO2 benefits. Now, you're not going to be a sprinter. There's going to be different benefits there, but this is just going to be that zone 2 training, which means you can talk as you do the activity. So not like sentences in a row like I am right now, but you can get out a sentence. So for example, and that's how you kind of understand what zone 2 is. If I'm with my running partner, I'm like, hey, how are you doing this morning? Now I want to take a breath now. Like I don't want to say, hey, how are you doing this morning? How's your day? How's your blah? Like that's way too much. That means I'm not working hard enough. But you want to kind of get that one sentence out, then you want to be able to take that breath and then say another sentence. So it's still labored conversation, but you can have a conversation. So that's like, if you don't want to wear a heart rate monitor and do all the tracking and have the smart devices, I get that. I've been there, I've done it, and it's great. It's a good way to start to really understand your body and delve into the nitty-gritty. And a talk test is great. Can I talk while I do the activity? If so, awesome. You're in that healthy zone 2. So now that kind of explained some of the issues of brain health, right? And how we're really constantly coating that brain, getting lots of good oxygen up to the brain. Also, cardiovascular exercise, aerobic exercise, like running, increases BD in F, so brain-derived neurotropic factor. And so this is going to improve executive functioning. So like being able to really think logically and clearly, emotional regulation. How important is that for like all of our interpersonal relationships? And then it reduces the risk of cognitive decline. So again, so I'm like checking some major boxes here for why running's helpful. And I'm not done yet. Like there's more. So there's also benefits with musculoskeletal longevity. So we know that our bone density is really, really important. And so how we continue to keep bone density is by keep putting stressors onto bones. So an easy example to see when there's no stress on a bone is when we go into a non-weight bearing state. And so this is where you can't put any weight on the foot. Maybe you had a surgery on your ankle, things like that. So it's in the past, how medicine was practiced is they did a lot more bed rest and a lot more non-weight bearing. And what they saw with this is that with decreased bone density, there was more like incidence of stress fractures and fractures, because when the bone's not stressed, it doesn't stay strong. So what we do during our day and during our week, the stressors we put onto our body is constantly signaling our body for what it needs to be able to withstand. And so if we're telling it it doesn't need to withstand anything, it's going to say, well, I'm not going to put a lot of effort into this when I've got other things working that I need to put effort into. And so things start to break down. So same thing happens with our brain. When we don't put any stress on it, it starts to break down. When we don't put stress on our bones, they start to break down. And so how do we put stress on bones? Well, it's weight-bearing activity. So walking, that's why there's a huge push in the medical community of get your patients walking. Like they've got to walk. Water aerobics is great. It is. And we've got to walk. You've got to be able to withstand ground reaction forces. So it's both, so you really need to be able to have your body weight in space and move it along the ground. And that will big time help keep the bone strong. Because if you fracture a hip because of decreased bone density, the likelihood of the different events that can happen that create all sorts of illness because of the periods of immobility it's very well documented. So can you heal from a hip fracture? Sure. If there's comorbidities, so other things going on, it just makes it harder and harder and harder. So we want strong bones. The other thing is we want strong muscles and strong ligaments. Because if you can move your body in space, if you fall down on the ground and you're strong enough to get yourself back up, then that's a much better predictor of being able to survive the next year than if you fall down on the ground and you can't get yourself back up because you're so weak. Now, the prognosis of dying within a year, and if you have a fracture, is actually pretty high. It's very scary. And so if you keep strong bones, strong muscles, strong ligaments, then you'll be able to recover from things that happen versus not being able to recover. So that's also another great reason for running. And it still doesn't stop there. You also have improved metabolic health. And so how does our digestive system work, and how can we really use all of the nutrients that we're eating and supplying our body with energy? And so running helps to improve insulin sensitivity. It helps to dispose of glucose and things that we don't need if we're not using it. And so it's just like these metabolic life shifts that happen, especially, just in different periods as we're aging. I mean, I've definitely noticed metabolic shifts in my 40s, so I have to be more strategic than I used to have to be with what I eat, when I eat, portions, all of that. I've definitely noticed that difference because I don't want a bunch of visceral fat, and that's fat that accumulates around my organs. Because that puts stress on my organs and it can lead to breakdown, and I don't want it. And so running helps with metabolic health, and so you don't build up that visceral fat. And so that's pretty cool. So we're talking about some like really pretty awesome just benefits, and it's from just one activity. I also explained that it's not as simple as just put shoes on and go. So that's the issue, is like you really want to understand how to run. You want to understand cross-training benefits, and you want to understand the importance of stretching. And so it's not so simple. Anything in life that has this much benefit is going to have work. It's going to. Nothing comes easy. Nothing with huge benefit is free. When it's like, meaning like not like money here, but like free for like input. Like you're going to have some good energy input in order to get the output. So, and like I said, like just a reminder, it's not about being fast. Doing just like a interval running where let's say you start off and you jog quarter mile or half mile, and then you walk for a quarter mile, and then repeat that. So it's like jog, walk, jog, walk, jog, walk. As long as you're keeping your heart rate elevated and you're not bringing your heart rate all the way back down to resting, because you don't need to recover that much, because the whole point is that we've got keeping the heart rate elevated. That's a great way to start. And that's totally fine. It's perfectly fine. You don't have to go out and just run a 5K. You can easily walk it, and you're going to have lots of benefit if the heart rate can't quite sustain running 3 miles, sustained. So there's so many ways to be able to get started, do it safely, and be able to continue to do it as you age. Like my running in my 40s, it really does look different than when I was in my 20s. It does. And right now I'm okay with it. Maybe when maybe when I'm older, I'll start, I'll push it in different ways. Maybe I'll sign up for different distances. I don't know. I'm just going to let that unfold as my life unfolds. So right now I meet myself where I am. So if there's a day where I'm just on the struggle bus, it's like I can't get one foot in front of the other. It's been 2 miles and I'm just not warming up. I might cut it in early that day. And typically when that happens, I end up sick the next day. So I was starting to fight something, which is why I was just feeling like I was on the ground. Other days I'm just tired. And then after a mile or two, it's like, wow, I feel so much better. This was like literally the best way I could have started my day. So it just just meet yourself where you are. Don't get so rigid that you have to fit this model that somebody else has created and it works for them. And then now you're just it's like fitting a square peg into a round hole. Like you're your own individual. If you can find a running partner that jives with you, that's awesome. But if it's not the best fit and you're constantly hurt or you're constantly not enjoying yourself because you're so out of breath that you feel like you're going to die, then that's okay. Let them do their run and you do yours. It can even be somebody that you put, I've got, friends where I put my AirPods in and we just chat as we run. It's a remote running partner. So it just kind of depends. You can run with a pet. I have my kid on his bike on the regular. So there's all sorts of ways to kind of have that accountability partner, which can be helpful. And it doesn't have to look just like one thing, which is pretty cool. So essentially, try and get out there if you can. Encourage other people in your life to join you, like my friend did to me, because it's changed my life. And so I'm really so grateful to her for just staying with it, of saying, come on, please come with me. I know you can do this. And it's really worked out well. So share this episode with somebody that you might find helpful. And, don't hesitate to reach out and put in the comments of any questions you might have, any videos that are like, hey, I'd really like to know about X, Y, or Z that relates to longevity. And I'd be happy to try and get that out and have fun.